Hello and welcome to Mapping Global China's Conversations. I'm Adele Carrai, and through Mapping Global China, we aim to deepen understanding of China's global presence and impact, looking not only at its economic footprint, but also its political, cultural, and normative dimensions. Our goal is to move beyond one-dimensional narratives and bring together diverse perspective that helps us see the many ways China interacts and shape the world. This series is made possible thanks to the generous support of the Carnegie Corporation of New York, NYU Shanghai, and the British Academy. Today, we are delighted to welcome Professor Jinghan Zeng, professor in the Department of Public and International Affairs at the City University of Hong Kong, where he just moved. He's also the founding editor-in-chief of the Cambridge Forum on Technology and Global Affairs. Professor Zheng is a leading scholar of Chinese politics and international relations, whose research spans from the Belt and Road Initiative, the geopolitics of artificial intelligence, and China cultural diplomacy through the Confucius Institute. And he's also been one of the youngest, probably, director of Confucius Institutes in the UK. And he will tell us more about his experience there today and his forthcoming book, Memoirs of a Confucius Institute. So thank you very much for being with us today, Professor Zheng.
Thank you for having me.
So let me start with some questions about your personal trajectory. So you pursued your education and career across China, the United States, the United Kingdom, and now Hong Kong. How have these different contexts shaped your research focus and your approach to international relations and Chinese politics?
Right. I think a lot of that provide a very different kind of cultural context of where we're working on. And I think when I do research on China, I find that it's very interesting about how you can get very different kind of perspectives when you talk to people in mainland China or talk to people in the US and talk to people in the UK. So my kind of academic career started by studying domestic politics of China, and gradually become more interested in how this domestic politics has been shaping Chinese foreign policy and China's role in the world. And that is where my main passion about academic research really is. And the way that when you study about China, you'll find this perception matters a lot. And China is often, I would argue, not the kind of China that people perceive in Europe, in the US, and even in China. And the way that you look at China are very different, with very different kind of angles, even for people who are in China as well. So that's where I find international relations very interesting, with people in different kind of perspectives, based in different kind of geographical location. Their perception of China and international relations are different. And that's why I think that kind of passion of understanding how different regions understand China, how different regions understand the new global order is a part of the reason that drive me from the US to the UK and now back in Hong Kong.
Thank you. I have a question for you with regard to perceptions, because there are perceptions, but then there is also some objectivity of what is China trying to do globally. So do you think that's accurate to say, or it's all about perceptions?
I think that's very much relevant to a theoretical debate, right? I mean, if you
Yeah.
talk to people who write a lot about constructivism, they will tell you everything is socially constructed. So in that regard, I mean, all we think about China is being socially constructed. So it's a lot about how you perceive it, not necessarily to do what China objectively do. But then realism might tell you a very different kind of story. So I think I'm kind of between, I think what China has been doing in the world in many ways has been shaping the perception. But I don't think that the perception always accurately reflect what China is doing and what China want to achieve. And I think this is directly relevant to the topic of what we're going to talk about today, about the Confucius Institute. And I think a lot of things about the way we talk about Confucius Institute in Europe, in the US, does not really match what I observed within as an insider of Confucius Institute. So that perception of China doesn't really match of what China is actually doing or what China actually want to do.
Thank you. And before going into your forthcoming book that tells the broader public your experience as a very young director of the Confucius Institute, I want to discuss a bit more soft power and public diplomacy. Because there is a mismatch here. China has spent a lot of money and effort to become a global power and to be perceived as a soft power, to cultivate its soft power reach globally. And Confucius Institute has been part of it. And you can elaborate more later. But if we stick to soft power, how do you see soft power? What China is trying to do to achieve soft power globally, and why there is a bit of this mismatch? It's actually backfired China. Confucius Institute now has been shut down. A lot of this Confucius Institute has been shut down. But even beyond Confucius Institute, what China has been trying to do, I mean, more broadly, if you were to kind of situate Confucius Institute within soft power debate and what China is trying to do with to expand its soft power.
That's actually a very good question, and it's a question that I want to address directly in the book as well. So when you talk about soft power, I mean, it's a concept from American scholar, we're very famous, and then it's a concept that China attach a lot of importance as well. So when Hu Jintao talking about back in them about China's soft power, it's very much want to construct or kind of promote a kind of international environment that is positive or favorable to China's peaceful rise, so that China can concentrate on its domestic development. And there are a lot of very brilliant scholars who has been writing very good work on social soft power studies. And I think some of them have been cited in my work as well. But I think I want to focus a bit on the relation between Confucius Institute and soft power. And I think it's certainly true, as you said, China has been spending a lot of money on soft power, and Confucius Institute is part of it. But I think we need to look at the Confucius Institute more comprehensively. I think that's a key argument I make actually in the second volume of my book, which might still take some time to be out. I make an argument that soft power is only one dimension of Confucius Institute, and that's a genuine misperception about Confucius Institute. Because we often say, every time when people talk about soft power or Confucius Institute, either politicians have been saying, Confucius is there to promote Chinese propaganda, promote Chinese influence, promote Chinese soft power, change our perception. Academic analysis also focus on how Confucius Institute is there to deliver soft power. But I think what I am arguing that this is only one of many dimensions of Confucius Institute. And to brief, I mean, it's a long argument, but very briefly summarize here. Number one, Confucius Institute is a joint partnership. So it's not only Chinese. That's also what I'm arguing. So it's funded between a Chinese organization and a local organization. So it's only half Chinese. Or if we use baby as an example, it's a mixed baby, right? So the Confucius Institute in the UK is a mixed baby. It's not entirely Chinese. And the local organization have considerable amount of governance and management of the Confucius Institute project. And they are not interested in promoting Chinese soft power. They have their own institutional interests. That's the key argument I made there. And number two is when you think about the idea of China wants to promote soft power through Confucius Institute. And then the question is, who is China? Right? Who we are talking about. And that's something I unpacked in the entire project as well, which I argue there are multiple Chinese stakeholders. You do have like Confucius Institute headquarters and now Chinese International Educational Foundation have that kind of view that we can use Confucius Institute to improve China's national image. That is true. But you also have other and Chinese stakeholders like Chinese universities who kind of support that idea but are more driven by their own institutional interests. So there is a bit nuance there we have to understand. It's linked to the wider debate in global China about the kind of misperception that China is a unitary actor, but actually it is not. And they have very diverse, sometimes competing interests. So if you follow that logic, then you will say that it's not always driven by soft power. Soft power is only one of dimension of Confucius Institute.
Thank you. And following your reasoning, which I completely support, about China having many different stakeholders. So you were one of the stakeholders of the Confucius Institute in your own way. So can you tell us a bit more about your own experience, the period of your serving as a director of Confucius Institute, and yeah, just a bit more broadly about your own experience there and how your being a stakeholder influenced the final baby, as you said, right? What was your component, your unique component, if you want, that made up this unique baby of Confucius Institute?
Yeah. There are several stakeholders, right? In the Chinese one, you got the founder, previously was Confucius Institute headquarters. You got Chinese university, and then you got local university. So in my case, it's Lancaster University in the UK. So three of them co-founded Confucius Institute. And what is interesting in this book, and also my role is, I am a Chinese national, but I am a UK director. I'm not a China director. And this confuses a lot of people, right? A lot of Chinese would think that because I'm a Chinese, I must be the China director. So the China director means that it is a representative sent by a Chinese university who come here to co-govern like the Confucius Institute. There are two directors. One is local director, like my role. I'm an employee of Lancaster University and also a professor in Lancaster University, and also appointed by Lancaster University to lead the Confucius Institute. So I'm a local director. My counterpart from China, which is South China University College, they send a professor come here, China director of Confucius Institute. So the China director and I as a local director, we govern the Confucius Institute together. So in that regard, to ensure the local stakeholder and the Chinese stakeholder interests are being represented. And what is interesting as well, I mean, for my role is the Chinese national, and also I write as a UK director and also a professor of Chinese politics. So I want to provide a very kind of aware perspective on this issue. And what I am arguing in this book and also the future volumes is that it is often the local university making decisions about Confucius Institute, not the Chinese university. And this is why a lot of discussion about Confucius Institute does not really match reality. Because if you follow a soft power logic, then you would assume what Confucius do has been following the Chinese strategic intention. What Chinese government wants will be translated into Confucius to do, but what actually in reality is not. It is a local university. In many cases, Lancaster University has been making the decisions based on Lancaster University interests. How we are going to organize Confucius Institute, what is a priority, where our funding should go, what Confucius Institute should do to support Lancaster University's internationalization goal, to support Lancaster University Chinese language program. And it's less about to promote Chinese propaganda or promote Chinese soft power. I think that local direct perspective is something quite different. You probably have been reading in the literature. And in the first volume of the book I talk about, I think there are two parts. The first part talk about my own personal observation from 2019 to 2025 and all the challenges. So there are three main challenges. The first one is the pandemic. The second one is the dissolution of Confucius Institute headquarters, which is the largest organizational change for the Confucius Institute. And the third challenge is back in 2022, when the Rishi Sunak pledged to ban all Confucius Institute in the UK. So in that book, I have been analyzing and unpacking those critical external challenges from a Confucius Institute director perspective, trying to show people a frank account of how I interpret those events, what we did. And when you read that book, you'll find that it's very less about how to advance or has little to do with Chinese national interests. It a lot more is about the Lancaster University perspective of those events and how they react to advance Lancaster University interests. So this is why I argue in this book, local stakeholders matters a lot. And in the second part of my book, I directly address all the claims that has been leading, as you mentioned, the massive closure of Confucius Institute around the world. The US used to be the country who hosts largest number of Confucius Institute, and now it is the UK. And a lot of arguments saying that, Confucius Institute is there promoting propaganda, promoting Chinese influence, and undermine institutional autonomy, undermine academic freedom, or two state secretary of the US claim that they are the spying agency. Mark Romeo actually has used to advocate a Stop CCP Spying on Campus Act that directly targets Confucius Institute, so make it very controversial. And I directly address them and explain my perspective of those issues, why those allegation does not really match with the reality that really exists. Because they are all seeing Confucius Institute as a Chinese organization. So whatever they do must reflect the Chinese interests. but in reality, it is not. It was a lot more about what the local organization, what the local university want.
Thank you. May I ask you, has there been instances in which Lancaster interest clashed with the China counterpart, Chinese university or the Hanban, right, the headquarter of the Confucius Institute, and how this was resolved? And was it ideological clash, or was probably much more simple clash? Because we always, as you were saying, there are all these misperceptions, like China tried to influence, limit freedom of expressions. So did you experience that, like censorship, or again, clashes of interest, and how these were resolved?
Yeah. Well, I think there are two issues. One is different interests that's happening every day. It's a daily daily kind of issue because we see things very differently, right? As all joint partnership, I think different stakeholders have their own interests, diverse interests, competing interests, and that happens a lot regarding on a wide range of issues on, for example, financial arrangement and also governance, and who have a bigger say, and what is the priority of the Confucius Institute, what is the focus of Confucius Institute, and what kind of strategy we should be having. I think different kind of stakeholders have different views, so that happens a lot. And I think on the second thing you're arguing is about censorship and academic freedom. I think that's something I directly addressed in the book in the first volume, which will be, I think, available in about 2 weeks' time. And I talk about how it is not an issue, and I believe it can be managed properly. So because I'm a professor in Chinese politics, so I have been frequently engaged in some of the sensitive topics and understand it very well. So we take a very deliberate effort to make sure it is not an issue. And we have been organizing, for example, dozens of talks about Chinese politics within the Confucius Institute. In 6 years' time, when I served as director, I think in the book I also talk about. I mean, most of the academic talks are fine, but we do have some challenge on some of the topics, which I specifically analyzed in my book. One is an event about Tibet. The other is an event on Japan. I mean, when people talk about Confucius Institute, they will say, they are here to certain people, promoting, censorship and cannot talk about the sensitive topics. That's not true. And they were saying that we have to get orders, directives from the Confucius headquarters, Hanban. That's not true. When we organize events, there is never kind of procedure to seek approval from Hanban. The only approval I need to get when I organize an event is from domestic Lancaster University. There is a governance team there, and they will be there to decide what event will go ahead, what event wouldn't go ahead. And their main issue of that governance is very much about whether this might lead to some campus security issue, right? And we never got an event being turned down. So I think there is a lot of kind of misperception about what's going on there in the Confucius Institute and what we can do, what we couldn't do. I wouldn't say that there are no pushback. I think in the book I talk about when we organize a Tibet event, when we organize about the Diaoyu Island event, how the pushback from the Chinese Communist State happened and has been creating some incidents, but we still managed to get things through. And I analyze in details about what leads to those issues, and which I argue it's not really from the Chinese state, as people would assume. The actual operation is very, very different.
Thank you. This was enlightening to understand how it operates, how this Confucius Institute operates. At the beginning, you also mentioned that there is variation between Confucius Institutes, so maybe even the UK, other Confucius Institute will operate differently, or in other countries. So yeah, can you tell us a bit more about this variation between different Confucius Institutes and also the strength of the Hanban in dictating the agenda, for instance, or blocking certain events because of sensitivity in other places?
Yeah. First of all, I think the argument I made is exactly that Hanban is not dictating because Hanban is so far away in Beijing. And in China, we have a kind of old saying that the sky is high, the emperor is far away. So a lot of things happening locally are not under Hanban's control, and they do not have the administrative capacity to process that. That's the first point. The second is Hanban era has gone. That's something I document in the book as well. Hanban dissolved back in 2020. And ever since then, the Chinese International Educational Foundation was founded. It is a non-governmental actor. And the way that it operates convincingly is fundamentally different. They do not get involved in daily kind of matters at all. So Confucius Institute now is largely operate between a Chinese university and host university. And we rarely heard any perspective from the foundation. So it's very much like a joint partnership. I think something to clarify. And the third point, back to what you mentioned about variation, I think that's a key point as well, because a lot of discussion about Confucius Institute, either as political allegation or in academic analysis of soft power, we tend to view Confucius Institute as identical Chinese organization, right? They have the similar founding model, the same founder, so they must be the same and operate within the same agenda, with the same structure, and with the same goal. But actually, if you follow a local perspective, it will tell you a very, very different story, because at national level, there are some national factors affecting Confucius Institute, which I unpacked in my second volume. The regional factor and the organizational factor, individual factor, and all those aggregate together is what is shaping the Confucius Institute. So I argue in this project that each Confucius Institute is uniquely different, and they have their different priority, different focus, and different activity. Depends on the local context where they are in. That's why they are different. And then back to the question you mentioned as well. I think you are right to say that what happened in Lancaster University Confucius Institute cannot be generalized to others. It is true, because I am the director. I study Chinese politics. That's why I'm interested in organizing, seminars for Chinese politics, right? But if the director is a linguistics expert or the director is a business expert, then they might be less interested in organizing Chinese politics seminars. They might be interested in Chinese business, Chinese music, Chinese literature. So that individual matters a lot, shaping it very differently. And last point to make is the pushback of that do not come from China. I think that that's something I mentioned. The pushback comes from Chinese individuals who have different political opinion on different kind of things. And often that it's not about directives from Beijing. It's about how individuals within university have different views, have strong views on certain things, and how things can be organizing. That's where we see the resistance.
Thank you. I have another question for you. Why do you think the Hanban was eliminated? I remember also when I was at the University of Roma La Sapienza that we have a Confucius Institute, and also Venice, that there was this Hanban from the center that will make some decisions about whom gives scholarships or not. Why there was this transformation in 2020, and what are the effects on the ground? Do you think that now there is even more variation between different Confucius Institute because there is less control, although you said that even before with the Hanban, there was not the capacity to really have full control or micromanage all these different Confucius Institutes?
Well, I think that's a lot of questions. I don't think that there is a lot of micromanage, because when Hanban was there are hundreds of Confucius Institute. Hanban simply don't have the capacity to micromanage anything. I think that's something to talk about administrative wise. And actually, when you were in Lancaster last time and we were first met in Lancaster, Hanban was still there. That was 2018, and I think I happened to be in a role. I think the dissolution of Hanban happened in my second year when I was a director, and all come in the middle of the pandemic, a big shock. And Hanban was the organization that bring Confucius Institute from nothing, from a concept to grower to one of the most widely discussed Chinese initiative, and make itself of one of also most influential cultural organization in the world. So it's a very much kind of interesting story about how Hanban rise from nothing to a very important position in China and in the world. And I think that this perspective on Hanban are very different. What do you perceive within China and externally? But then why Hanban dissolve? I think that's a great question. At the time, I don't understand at all. And as a director, I have to say I strongly oppose that. And I still hold that view as well. If you're interested in why, you can probably take a look at the book, and where I show my splitting identity as a professor of Chinese politics, I agree that the move is right because if China truly want to promote soft power to fit international standard, you cannot have too many government involvement. So if you truly to say Confucius should be like British Council, then you should cut your state ties. You should cut that influence from the state. So the move from Hanban to now a foundation model is the right move to go. Having said that, being a Confucius director, I don't think that's a good idea, right? So that's where my other identity comes in. I strongly oppose it because things are a lot more organized when Hanban was there. You have a dedicated team who have experience of handling funding issue, personnel issue, and all sorts of detailed matters, and they can get things done. But now when you without them and all decentralize that power to Chinese university, and that creates all sorts of issues and all sorts of problems that is yet to be solved. Now we're talking about it. 5 years after Hanban is gone, a lot of issues are still there, not being solved. So from an administrative perspective, the dissolution of Hanban may constitute, I argue in the book, that a lot less efficient. And in many ways, I miss the times when Hanban was there. You
Yeah,
got a dedicated team who is there,
yeah,
support you in operating a lot of things and doing
yeah.
a lot of things that really support you. And then,
It's also, sorry, it's a leap of faith from the government. I mean, because delegating so much, it's a kind of a real loosening of control, which is very un-Chinese in the way I see China. Yeah, it's like giving all this power to universities in China and local partners wherever they are. So, and I
yeah,
think that's a
I agree.
trend. It's a trend, might be a trend of kind of more opening up rather than this top-down control, rigid top-down control. Although again, was limited, as you said before, that there was no micromanagement, but there was still organization and top-down efforts. Now it's more horizontal in a way. It feels like much more horizontal relationship between different stakeholders, and uh,
Yeah.
and it is quite surprising looking at China. I mean, as we see, like the government, the way politics work and the government works in China.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a key debate within Chinese politics, right? To what extent is top-down approach, bottom-up approach, and then how the state centralize the power or decentralize the power. I think a lot of discussion in Chinese politics is how everything 2012, the power in China has been centralized and then changing the way how China works. So I fully, I mean, I am engaged in that debate, so I understand that. But when you look at the Confucius case and also speaking as someone who is inside of the entire computer network, then you find a lot of reason why they need to centralize a bit, why they need to manage it a bit. Because if you don't do that, the quality of the work
Mm.
is compromised.
It's a
So, for
mess.
example,
It's
yeah. So, sorry.
No, it's like a mess potentially. Like if you're left to individual actors and stakeholders without coordination, but maybe the new office institute that they created, it helps partly to coordinate. I'm sure there is some administrative centralization, less than with the Hanban, but some control is retained, some guidelines, something that is like standardized.
I think there is very little. So when you talk about Chinese International Educational Foundation, I think the very reason why they changed from Hanban to that is they want to make this real. So in the past, there is a government actor who is coordinating things. Now it's to a non-government actor who do not involve in daily operation of Confucius Institute, only manage what they call a branding of Confucius Institute. And
Mm.
then most of the matters were delegated to the Chinese university to do. And this is where the trouble comes in. And where, as a computer director, which I do not necessarily think it's good for the computer institute. So take very small matters to focus on about transferring money from Chinese organization outside of China, right? Previously, when Hanban do that, it has a lot of governmental ties and it has dedicated team who do the accounting, finance, and able to coordinate things, get that done. But now when you decentralize that to individual universities, they have to have their own financial rules and regulations. Many of them haven't really been transferring money outside of China. And they have to deal with different Chinese government agency to get that done by themselves. And they don't have that experience.
Yeah.
So even those small tasks will be enormously difficult without Hanban. And that is the issue we're facing. And it's only one issue. You also got a lot of other issues about employment, contract, personnel, and a lot of other things there. So that's why I think things are a lot more complicated without Hanban.
Yeah.
And back to the question you asked, why Hanban dissolved? I think that's something also very interesting as well, because when Hanban dissolved in 2020, things are doing great. I would say doing great. Things are doing still very good in Europe and in the UK. And many universities actually who wants to build a Confucius Institute value this link with the Chinese government. And here the Chinese government will talk about Chinese Ministry of Education. And many universities want to build stakeholder relation with this ministry. For example, if you have a campus operating in China, you are now in NYU Shanghai. So for NYU Shanghai to operate, NYU must have a very good relation with Chinese Ministry of Education because they are the regulator there. They are the one who approve it. Once it's being established, they will be the one processing and also making some decisions to ensure the operation of there. So that stakeholder relation is crucial to NYU. And in the UK, there are lots of UK universities have their campuses in China. And they want to have a good relation with Chinese Ministry of Education. And having the Confucius Institute being part of the Chinese Ministry of Education, previously the Confucius Institute headquarters was part of the Chinese Ministry, relevant, affiliated with the Chinese Ministry of Education. So that stakeholder relations was viewed very important in the UK. So when we heard about the news that the dissolution of Confucius headquarters and now creating a governmental entity, a new foundation without any governmental tie, that wasn't very desirable to many in the UK. And the main factor of that is because of the US. I think at the time they made this decision, wants to save the Confucius Institute in the US to say now we actually cut governmental tie and can we keep those Confucius Institute in the US? But the consequence is severe. I think number one, it haven't really saved those Confucius Institute from being closed in the US. And number two, it's a Chinese solution, or I would say probably a kind of decision used to trying to, I mean, it's a decision based on circumstances of one country, but affected all other countries with negative consequences. So I think for China, it's a big lesson to learn how to engage with the rest of the world when different regions have different needs for China, how you are going to develop approach. And I would argue they need to, back in then, they probably should be thinking about a more diverse approach rather than one single approach to deal with a problem come from only one country.
And this is it's a recommendation that Beijing should listen, especially now that it's expanding all over the world and they all have different needs. And so it's important to cultivate or find solutions that are based on the local needs and they might be different. So that's actually a very good point, an excellent point. So before we conclude, I want to ask you a bit more about the activities that you organize, like some of the activities of the Confucius Institute, because also there are some misconceptions about these activities, what the Confucius Institute, but what on the daily basis are the operations of the Confucius Institute, and how do you think these activities cultivated or promoted cultural diplomacy and soft power? Although soft power, as you said before, is not the only lens through which we should look at the Confucius Institute, but from a soft power perspective, how this activity do you think bear fruit in terms of China image globally?
In terms of daily activity, I think they are basically Confucius are there to promote Chinese language and culture. So we deliver credit bearing courses in the university and also extracurricular kind of courses in Chinese language to the students who learn in Chinese, covering all ages. So you can have children like at year 5 joining some of our language sessions, or people who retired and also joining as well to learn Chinese language. And also some other cultural activities, for example, about Taiji, about Chinese calligraphy, Chinese painting. So all sorts of kind of activity being organized in the Confucius Institute, and with different kind of ages we are talking about. So mostly about language and culture or anything that is relevant with that area. You have a variation of that. For example, Chinese dancing, and you also have academic events. So different Confucius Institute have different priority. So in London, there are 8 Confucius Institute. So you have like in LSE, they have a Confucius Institute for business that more focused on engaging with business stakeholder who want to do business in China. So they are teaching, for example, some business culture to them and how to do business with Chinese companies and Chinese wining and dining culture, things like that. You also have Confucius focus on dancing, or Confucius focus on Chinese medicine. Confucius focus on like Open University. It's Confucius to deliver things online. So you have a variation of activity of what they do, but mostly about Chinese language and Chinese culture. And how this is relevant to soft power. I think generally speaking, you could not deny that when you organize a lot of Chinese language cultural activity, it's relevant to soft power. It's definitely relevant to soft power. And you can see that a good quality of those events might help to promote Chinese soft power, right? So when you got more and more people enjoying Chinese culture, enjoying Chinese language, they might want to go to China. They might want to talk more to Chinese people. Their view on China might be different, which I think all of those are true. Having said that, if we rethink about it, then who isn't doing soft power? When you have British universities operating in China, they are teaching British program, British courses delivered by British faculty. They are promoting British soft power. NYU Shanghai, you have faculty employed by the NYU and delivering American curricula using American kind of structural cultural system ideas. It's also promoting American soft power as well, but does not mean that NYU's primary mission is to promoting American soft power. It's a byproduct, right? The main purpose of NYU Shanghai is to deliver educational program that is based on NYU's interest, NYU's agenda, and then along the way, you might be promoting American soft power a bit. And I argue the same thing for the Confucius Institute. So its main job there is to delivering those educational program for the local organization, local university. They want those funding to be able to provide those programs, right? And along the way, those programs might change people's view about China, might promoting China's soft power, which is all true, but it's a byproduct of this global engagement. And in a world that we are all connected to each other and influence each other in different kind of ways, and those influence goes mutually.
This is like wonderful. Like I like your framing of it, of China soft power, that is a byproduct. And soft power of any country is a byproduct because there's the target audience that shape this soft power because it's attracted to certain things. And in the case of the Confucius Institute, it seems that it's even more the product, whatever the events organized, the cultural events or activities, it's really the results partly of both the interest of the target, like Lancaster in your case, and the Chinese university before the Hanban. Now it's no longer the Hanban. So I like this framing a lot. So one last question for you. So based on your experience and also your scholarship on international relations, how do you see the future of China's cultural diplomacy and soft power, where soft power going, as well as the Confucius Institute? So the three things, like cultural diplomacy through Confucius Institutes and its soft power. Given that we live in a very interesting time of very tense geopolitical competition where China is seen as just an enemy, as a threat. Whatever it does, whenever there is a Chinese Communist Party involved, then it's malign. It's malign influence. What you're bringing to us today with your experience is a very different story, much more nuanced. But yeah, so what do you think is the future of Confucius Institute, China cultural diplomacy, and moving forward?
I think the Confucius case reflects a learning curve for China of how it rise to a certain stage that is able to have those resources to engage with the world and trying to, launch those overseas initiatives. And you see how the Confucius rise to the peak time and then meeting where we are with massive closure in Western countries. And I would argue the peak time of Confucius is gone. And I don't see any possibility of it go back to that peak era in the nearly future. And if you want to know more, I will refer you probably to my book. And in the meanwhile, you see other kind of Chinese initiative which might be promoting soft power and probably more effectively in many ways. And I think China learned a lesson from the Confucius Institute and learned a lesson how it engaged with the world. But I would like to conclude by saying what worries me a lot is how China become less interested in promoting soft power, right? And this fundamentally is different from many would be think. When you say massive closure of competition in Western countries, in many countries, a lot of people will be celebrating, oh, Chinese influence is gone, it's closed, we win. But I see a big danger of that. And when you go back to why Confucius was created and grow to its glory, was a period that China actively opened its arms to embrace the world. It truly want to be integrated into the world, want to be liked, want to be the friends of everybody, and make an effort to do that. What is really dangerous is a current situation that it realizes that China is not so welcome. Chinese ideas, Chinese values, or China in general is not appreciated by the Western world, and they lose interest in engaging with the Western world, losing interest of trying to make it attractive, trying to improve its national image. And you see that provokes, then the question is, okay, what China should do? When you are no longer interested in soft power, maybe you can spend more money in hard power. In all those hard powers make you stronger. So in many ways, I think that's something really worries me. And especially speaking as a Chinese, what I've been seeing China from within China's perspective. You are based in China as well. You see that often the Chinese foreign policy are debated by two groups of people. Generally speaking, you got one who is very nationalist, who believe the West is there trying to undermine China, demoralize China and demonize China is bad. We need to fight back hardly, even with all possibilities, even military solutions. You also got other group people who like to engage with Western of the world, who appreciate Western culture, saying speak English is a good thing, China should be part of the world, we should be liked. We should welcome Western ideas and engage with it. And I very much think that those people involved in Confucius Institute lies in that camp. When you hammer down those people who are doing engagement, who are you going to empower? You are going to empower those Chinese nationalists who said, I was right all the time. I told you it wouldn't work. We won't be liked. Whatever you do, how much money you throw in, and it won't change your Western perception. So why can't we be on the same page, build up all the hard power, trying to make China great, and worry less about how the West perceive about you? Just do whatever you want, and it's less about how they perceive you. So I think that is a trend which I worry most. And that's the bad news, not only for China, but for the West as well.
One last thought, and then we conclude. Don't you think that private companies with their own innovation and can come up and create soft power for China? Because that's something that we are not ready yet in the West, but with Chinese brands that are not just cheap, but they're cool. A lot of things are great Chinese products that are going to inundate the Western market. Even not just electric vehicles, but just brand a la Bubu, and other things that China is so advanced and so innovative that start to create a different view of China that is not related to the government. But then maybe the government can bring in this, and then probably it will be over with soft power in a way. And I think it also goes with the limitations of the concept of soft power in a way. So what are your thoughts about perhaps private actors going out? Now there's all these companies that need to go out, need to find new markets, and they are innovative. What are your thoughts on this?
I think certainly. I mean, when you see the rise of Chinese companies about, TikTok, about DeepSeek, it changed people's perception about China and now view China, oh, China is able to do tech. China has great Chinese companies doing A, B, C, and D. And I think it definitely going to enhance Chinese soft power. But if you revert the angle, you can argue the same thing. Hollywood movies, right? They are not made for American government. But I mean, the more you talk about Hollywood movies, it contribute to American soft power, American influence, make more people want to go to the US, or want to being educated in the US, or wants to inspire a kind of American style of way of living. So it's the same. I think for all the private actors in China, how they contribute to China's soft power is the same with how Western companies they can contribute to Western soft power. So I don't think anything different there. Chinese government, of course, will welcome that. But what they can do, I think, is limited. After all, but I think we need to understand that the Chinese company goes abroad to do those business is not because of the Chinese government. It's
Yeah.
because of their own corporate interests. They are mostly interested in their corporate interests as well. So if they are successful, they are going to promote or in Chinese soft power. But if they fail or they do something bad, they're also going to damage the reputation of China as well. You have lots of examples of how sometimes even Chinese state-owned enterprise operating in Africa, not in a way that is good to China's reputation and that angry Chinese government. So I think it's double-edged sword, and how the way Chinese companies operate in relation to soft power is not different from that in the West.
Thank you. Any final thoughts? I think your last observation about that if China fails in a way in this effort and like China is not well perceived abroad, then this will lead to perhaps shutting down more Confucius Institute and also ending all the efforts to reach out to the world, to make friends, and will foster instead a more nationalistic faction or like nationalistic thinking that, yeah, we should actually resist the West and stand up against the West, and perhaps strengthening the military component, military power instead of soft power. Anything that you will actually recommend to the West, to the US, or even to China to avoid this escalation and to go back to a place where we are trying to understand each other? Because I think making friends is also try to understand each other. You come to Confucius Institute, you get the scholarship to go to China and you study Chinese, and so you see with your own eyes what China is about. But now this is kind of not ending, but it's reduced. And in the US as well, I think the number of people interested in studying Chinese or China-related stuff has dropped dramatically. And not to mention Confucius Institute that's been shut down.
I think Confucius Institute is a very important example for the West to learn how to engage with China, and also for China to learn how to engage with the rest of the world. I think both sides has misperception about a lot of things. And after all, the rise of China, Confucius Institute shows about the rise of China as a new phenomenon of how China gradually start to learn about its role in the world, how it's being perceived, things like that. I think it offers valuable lessons for not only Confucius Institute relevant stakeholder, but also all the Chinese companies when they want to go out of China, for example, operating in Europe. What Confucius Institute face in terms of local policy environment, political environment, perception, all those issues will be faced by other Chinese companies. So in that regard, it deserves a lot of attention and studies and trying to draw the lesson from it. And also for Western countries, I don't think that my book will be very popular in Western country because what it offers is such a different story, such an alternative lens to understand a widely discussed topic. So I understand that. But I hope that those people who are critical of my view or convinced in general would be engaging in the argument I made and trying to, debate. I'm very open to a debate on why they disagree with me and on what basis, and with an evidence informed approach. Because now a lot of discussion, including recently in the UK, about freedom of speech and how this might impact Confucius Institute, is less about what has been happening on the ground. It's more about the general perception of China. And lastly, what kind of things I would say about the future of China and what lesson we can draw from Confucius Institute to tell us about China and the West. I want to leave all the answers to my book. So for the listeners of this interview, and I would encourage you to probably go to check out my book. The first volume is, I think, will be available probably when this interview is out. And the second volume will be released hopefully in 2026, and you will find detailed answers of my views on those topics and on Confucius details from those books.
Wonderful. This was fantastic, and thank you so much. And I can't wait to read the book, Memoirs of Confucius Institute Director. And I encourage you all to read Professor Zheng book on his own personal experience about Confucius Institute that provides a very different, accurate, on the ground view of how a Confucius Institute operate beyond all this misperception and perceptions and misperceptions about what Confucius Institute do and how China soft power operates. Thank you so much. Yeah.